I stood in front of the bathroom mirror that morning, staring at the woman who looked back at me. For a long moment, I barely recognized her. The fine lines around my eyes seemed deeper than yesterday. The grooves around my mouth more pronounced. Strands of gray threaded stubbornly through my hair, and no matter how I brushed it, they caught the light. 38, I reminded myself. But the mirror told me a harsher truth. I looked closer to 45. A tired sigh escaped my lips. Somewhere along the way, time had stolen my youth, and I hadn't even noticed until it was gone. A knock rattled the bathroom door. "Mom, are you going to be much longer? Sophie needs to use the bathroom." Ashley's voice cut sharp and impatient. I glanced at the clock. 8 o'clock already. We had 40 minutes before we had to be out the door. Quickly rinsing my mouth, I opened the door. Ashley stood there with her arms crossed, her dark hair perfectly straightened, her expression already irritated with me. She grabbed her little sister by the wrist and marched inside without another word. Sophie toddled after her, still half asleep, whispering a soft thank you, only because Ashley prompted her to. I stepped aside, holding back the sting of frustration. Ashley had been testing me more and more lately. Every word from my mouth seemed to ignite her disdain. I tried not to let it show, but every barb she threw at me cut deeper than I wanted to admit. At breakfast, I set down bowls of oatmeal and glasses of milk. Ethan sat quietly, spoon in hand, eager to eat before school. Sophie wriggled into her chair, rubbing her eyes. Ashley eyed the food and curled her lip. "Oatmeal again? And this milk is warm. You can't even get breakfast right, Mom." I bit down on my tongue. "It's not warm, it's straight from the fridge," I answered, trying to keep my voice even. Ashley scoffed. "Sure, maybe to you it's cold. But honestly, you don't know how to make anything decent. You don't even bother with makeup. Look at yourself. You look like an old woman. Mrs. Henderson down the street is in her 40s and looks better than you ever did." Her words stung, sharper than any knife. I wanted to snap back to remind her of everything I carried alone. The bills, the shifts at the hotel, the endless nights with homework and laundry, but I swallowed it down. I had learned long ago that arguing only fueled her cruelty. Ethan put down his spoon and looked at his sister. "Stop being mean. Mom works hard. At least we have food. You should be grateful." Ashley rolled her eyes. "Grateful for this? For living like we're poor? For driving that junk car to school every day?" Sophie watched the exchange, confused, her small hands cupping the glass of milk. "I like Mommy's oatmeal," she whispered softly, almost afraid to take sides. The tension in the room thickened like fog. I sat at the table, forcing myself to breathe, to count silently in my head the way I often did when anger threatened to overwhelm me. 10 seconds. Inhale, exhale. By the time I reached 10, the sharp urge to lash out dulled, leaving only the heavy ache of sadness. "Finish your food," I said quietly. "We're leaving soon." Ashley pushed her bowl away with a loud scrape of the spoon. Ethan finished dutifully, glancing at me with worried eyes. Sophie ate in silence, swinging her feet beneath the chair. Minutes later, I herded them all out the door. The cold Scranton air bit at our cheeks as we hurried toward the old sedan parked at the curb. I helped Sophie into her booster seat, checked Ethan's backpack, then slid behind the wheel. The engine coughed before it finally started, a rough reminder of how fragile everything felt in our lives. Ashley sat in the back seat with her arms folded, her eyes fixed on the passing houses, refusing to look at me. Ethan pressed closer to the window, silent but loyal. Sophie hummed a tune, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing between her sister and me. As I steered the car onto the main road, I blinked back the tears that threatened to spill. My chest ached with the weight of it all, the criticism, the loneliness, the gnawing sense that no matter how hard I tried, it would never be enough for my daughter. I tightened my grip on the wheel, forcing myself to focus on the traffic lights ahead. The day had only just begun, and already it felt unbearable. But I had no choice. I kept driving, each breath shallow, each tear stubbornly held back, praying silently that somehow we would make it through. The silence in the car didn't last long. Ashley shifted in the back seat, arms crossed tightly. Her reflection in the window was sharp, chin raised, eyes narrowed with contempt. I knew what was coming before she even opened her mouth. Do you ever notice how everyone else's mom actually looks like they care? Mrs. Parker drops Haley off every morning in a nice SUV. She wears heels makeup. You look like a tired maid. No wonder, Dad. She stopped short, biting down on the rest of the sentence, but the words she didn't say still landed like a punch. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Ashley, enough. She leaned forward between the seats. I'm just saying you embarrass me. You don't even try. It's like you gave up on life. And dragging us down with you? I hate it. I felt the heat rise in my chest, the sting of every accusation cutting deeper than the last. Ethan turned sharply toward her. Quit it. Mom works harder than anyone. If you hate it so much, why don't you walk? Ashley's eyes flashed. Maybe I will. I pulled the car over to the shoulder with a screech, my pulse hammering in my ears. I turned to face her, my voice trembling but firm. Get out. If you're so ashamed of me, if you think you're too good to sit in this car, then walk yourself to school. For a heartbeat, she looked stunned. Then her lips twisted into a defiant smile. Fine. She yanked open the door, slamming it hard enough to rattle the whole car. Sophie burst into tears in the back seat, her little hands covering her ears. Ethan's face flushed red with anger as he shouted after her, but Ashley was already stomping down the sidewalk, backpack bouncing against her shoulder. I wanted to call her back, to take the words back, but pride and exhaustion held me frozen. With a heavy heart, I pulled back onto the road. Sophie sobbed softly. Mommy, why did you make her leave? My throat tightened. She wanted to go on her own, sweetheart. She'll be fine. She knows the way. But the reassurance rang hollow, even to my own ears. By the time I dropped Ethan and Sophie off at school, I was trembling. My hands shook on the steering wheel, my chest hollow with guilt and dread. I couldn't afford to break down now. My shift at the hotel started in 15 minutes, and if I was late again, I knew the manager wouldn't hesitate to write me up or worse. The hotel lobby greeted me with artificial warmth and the scent of stale coffee. Behind the front desk, Mrs. Cartwright, the manager, stood with her clipboard pressed against her chest, her lips already pursed. You're cutting it close again, Linda. I know, I'm sorry. Traffic, save it. She tapped her pen against the board. 2 complaints yesterday. One about the wrong wake-up call time, another about you not smiling enough. This isn't a charity, Linda. If you can't keep up, there are plenty of women who'd be happy to take your place. Her words stung, but I forced a polite nod, biting back the urge to defend myself. Behind me, guests wheeled their luggage across the tile floor, voices blending into a dull hum. I pasted on the best smile I could manage and took my place at the desk. For the next hour, I moved through the motions, checking in guests, answering phones, arranging wake-up calls, while inside my thoughts spiraled. Ashley's face, twisted in anger, replayed in my mind. Sophie's tears echoed in my ears. Every sharp word from Mrs. Cartwright dug deeper into the cracks already forming in me. By the time I stole a moment to catch my breath, I felt like a hollow shell. I was surviving, nothing more. No safety net, no partner, no one to lean on. Just me, holding everything together with frayed strings that threatened to snap at any second. By the time my shift ended, darkness had already settled over Scranton. The December air cut bitter and sharp as I stepped out of the hotel, pulling my coat tighter around me. My feet ached, my head throbbed, but all I could think about was Ashley. I replayed the image of her walking away from the car, her shoulders stiff with defiance. I told myself she'd come home on her own, that she was probably sitting in her room by now, sulking like she always did after a fight. But when I opened the apartment door, The stillness told me otherwise. The light in Ashley's room was off, her bed untouched. Only Ethan sat at the kitchen table, homework spread out before him, and Sophie lay on the couch, curled up with her favorite blanket. "Is Ashley back?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Ethan shook his head without looking up. "Haven't seen her." I dropped my bag, my heart sinking. I pulled out my phone, dialed her number, and listened to it ring and ring until it went to voicemail. I tried again. Still nothing. The silence on the other end felt heavier than the night itself. Sophie stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, why isn't Ashley home? Did she get lost?" I forced a smile I didn't feel. "She's fine, sweetheart. She's probably just with a friend. She'll be home soon." But the words tasted like ash. I knew how reckless Ashley could be when she was angry. The thought of her wandering the streets alone, vulnerable, made my chest tighten until it hurt to breathe. I set dinner on the table, simple reheated leftovers, but barely touched my plate. Ethan ate in silence, glancing at me from time to time, his eyes too wise for his 10 years. Sophie picked at her food, her gaze flicking to the door every few minutes, as if willing her sister to appear. 9 o'clock passed, then 10. I called again and again, leaving messages that grew more desperate each time. "Ashley, please come home. I'm sorry. Just please." No answer. By 11, the weight of exhaustion crashed down. I tucked Sophie into bed, kissed her forehead, and assured her everything was fine. Ethan lingered in the hallway, his small hand brushing mine. "She'll come back, Mom," he said quietly. "She always does." I nodded, but tears burned behind my eyes. I didn't want him to see me fall apart. So I locked myself in the bathroom, the only place where I could collapse in private. The fluorescent light hummed overhead as I sank to the floor, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. That's when the screen lit up. A text from Ashley. My pulse leapt, finally a sign. But as I opened it, my stomach dropped. "I'm not coming back tonight. I don't want to live with you anymore. Stop calling me." The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. My chest tightened, and a sob broke free, echoing off the tiled walls. I pressed my palm to my mouth to stifle the sound, but it was useless. The dam had broken. A soft knock came at the door. "Mom." Ethan's voice was small, hesitant. "Are you crying?" I swallowed hard, wiped my face with trembling hands, and tried to steady my breathing. But when I opened the door, Ethan's worried eyes told me he already knew. He wrapped his arms around me, his head barely reaching my chest. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered. "We'll be okay." And for the first time that night, I let myself cling to my son, letting his fragile comfort hold together the pieces of me that were breaking apart. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed with eyes that burned from crying and a body that felt twice its age. Sophie was still half asleep when I coaxed her into her clothes, and Ethan moved quietly, as if afraid that any sudden sound might break me. Ashley's bed remained empty, sheets untouched. I wanted to believe she'd slipped in during the night, but the silence of her room told the truth. After dropping Sophie and Ethan at school, I headed straight to the main office to ask about Ashley. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Graham, met me with a concerned frown. "Mrs. Thompson, I was going to call you today. Ashley hasn't been in class for 3 days now. We've logged her absences. If it continues, we'll have to notify the district. You know the truancy laws." Her words made my stomach twist. Truancy meant intervention. Intervention meant caseworkers, possibly child protective services. The idea of strangers poking into our lives, questioning whether I was a fit mother, terrified me. "I know," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "I'm trying to get her back home. She ran off after an argument. I'm doing everything I can." Mrs. Graham softened, but her tone stayed firm. "You need to find her, Linda. These situations can spiral fast." I left the building with my heart pounding in my chest. My hands shook as I dialed the numbers of Ashley's friends, one after another. Most didn't answer. A few responded with vague excuses. They hadn't seen her, or they didn't know where she was staying. Finally, one admitted she was crashing at a friend's place, but refused to say more. "Ashley doesn't want you to know," the girl whispered before hanging up. I drove aimlessly around Scranton, peering down familiar streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of her dark hair, her defiant stride. Every teenager I passed made my breath hitch, but none of them were her. By evening, Ethan sat at the table, pretending to do his homework, though I knew he was watching me more than the page. Sophie tugged at my sleeve. "Why doesn't Ashley come home, Mommy? Did she stop loving us?" I forced a smile, though my throat ached. "She's just angry right now, sweetheart. But she still loves us. She'll come back." But I wasn't sure I believed it. Hours later, Ashley finally answered one of my messages. The relief was short-lived. Her words came blunt, full of pride and defiance. "I don't need you. I'm better off on my own. Stop trying to control me." I stared at the screen, numb. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, desperate to write something that would cut through her stubbornness, but what could I say? I had already begged, pleaded, promised. Nothing reached her. I set the phone down, pressing my palms into my eyes until sparks of light danced behind them. The apartment felt colder than ever, the silence unbearable. For the first time, I wondered if I had already lost her, not to an accident or some stranger, but to her own pride, her own misguided belief that life without me would somehow be better. The thought hollowed me out. I had carried her inside me, brought her into this world, loved her more fiercely than anything, and now she was slipping away, beyond my reach. And I didn't know how to pull her back. That weekend, I drove across town to Martha's house. The little two-story had grown quiet and dim since her stroke. Once, she had been a sharp-tongued woman with endless energy, but now she lay confined to a bed in the downstairs den. Her world shrunk to four walls and the rhythm of caretakers who came and went. Most days, it was me who filled in the gaps, bathing her, making meals, tidying the house. I told myself I did it for the kids, for the memory of Mark, though sometimes even that felt like a cruel joke. The air inside smelled faintly of antiseptic and old fabric. I set down my coat and went to her room. Martha turned her head slowly when I entered, her eyes tired but still piercing. "You're late," she murmured, her voice slurred but sharp. "I'm here now," I said gently, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. "How are you feeling today?" She gave a dry laugh, like a woman trapped in her own useless body. "What do you think?" I didn't answer. I busied myself with the basin of water, washing her hands, combing her thinning hair. It was easier to focus on the motions than on her bitterness. As I worked, memories surfaced unbidden. I saw myself years earlier, walking down the aisle in a simple dress, my hand tucked into Mark's strong grip. I remembered the way he smiled at me then, so full of promises I believed with my whole heart. We'd been so young, so sure that love was enough to carry us through anything. The first years of marriage blurred together in a collage of small apartments, second-hand furniture, and laughter over late-night takeout. Then came Ashley, tiny fists, sleepless nights, the wonder of becoming parents. Ethan followed, then Sophie. Our lives were far from perfect, but I thought we were building something real. But the truth had a way of finding me. I remembered the night of the accident, the knock on the door, the officer's solemn face. "Your husband was in a collision." At first, I thought only of rushing to the hospital, of holding his hand. But then came the words that cut deeper than any loss. He hadn't been alone. There had been a woman with him, a woman he'd been seeing for months. He hadn't just died that night. My marriage, my trust, the illusion of the man I thought I knew, they all shattered in one brutal instant. I wrung out the washcloth and laid it across Martha's forehead. She watched me with something almost like pity. "He was his father's son," she whispered, "restless, never satisfied." The words stung, but I swallowed them. There was no point in fighting with a bedridden woman. Still, anger rose in me like bile. I had lost Mark twice, first to his betrayal and then to death. Even now, years later, the wound refused to heal. As I tucked the blanket tighter around Martha's frail body, I felt hollow. Caring for her was supposed to honor his memory, but all it did was remind me of everything I had lost: the husband I thought I had, the faith I'd once carried, the certainty that love was enough. I left her house that night with the weight of betrayal pressing heavy on my chest, a burden I could never seem to set down. The days began to blur together. Shifts at the hotel, school drop-offs, nights with Martha, endless piles of laundry and bills that never seemed to shrink. Every hour of my life felt spoken for, yet nothing ever truly got done. I was running on fumes, patching holes in a ship that was already sinking. Winter in Scranton only made everything heavier. The cold seemed to creep into my bones, turning simple tasks into uphill battles. The apartment's heater rattled constantly but never kept the rooms truly warm. I'd wake up before dawn to scrape ice from the windshield, praying the old sedan would start. More often than not, the engine groaned in protest, threatening to give out completely. One morning it finally did. I turned the key again and again, but the car refused to come alive. Panic rose in my chest. Without that car, I couldn't get to work, couldn't get the kids to school, couldn't make it to Martha's house. Everything depended on it. I called a mechanic I barely knew, and he came to look it over. His verdict was grim. Transmission's shot. You're looking at $1,500, maybe more. $1,500. Might as well have been 15,000. I didn't have it. I didn't even have a fraction of it. I scraped together the little savings I had hidden away. Money meant for emergencies, though in truth, every day of my life felt like one. With trembling hands, I counted out just enough for a temporary fix. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the receipt in front of me, staring at the dwindling numbers in my bank account. The kids were asleep, the apartment finally quiet, but the silence only magnified the ache in my chest. One unexpected repair had wiped away the tiny cushion I'd fought so hard to build. Ethan shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, are you still working?" I quickly pushed the papers aside. "Go back to bed, sweetheart." He tilted his head, studying me with a seriousness that broke my heart. "You're always so tired. I wish I could help." I forced a smile, brushing his hair back. "You already do, honey, just by being you." After he went back to bed, I sat there in the dim light, listening to the hum of the heater and the distant whistle of the wind outside. My life felt like a constant balancing act. Work, children, Martha, bills. One slip, one unexpected expense, and everything threatened to collapse. I caught sight of myself in the dark window, my reflection, faint but unforgiving. Hollow eyes, shoulders slumped, a woman stretched to her limits. Was this all I was destined for? To keep fighting battles I could never win, until there was nothing left of me but exhaustion? Yet, even as the questions haunted me, I knew I had no choice. There was no one else to carry the weight. No partner, no family I could lean on. Just me, standing between my children and the cold world outside. So I squared my shoulders, gathered the bills into a neat stack, and blew out the kitchen candle. Tomorrow would demand more of me than I had to give, but I would show up anyway, because that's what survival meant. It was a Thursday evening when the front door finally creaked open, and Ashley walked back into the apartment as if she had never left. My heart leapt at the sight of her, though I forced myself not to rush forward. She carried herself with that same air of defiance, chin high, expression unreadable, but her eyes betrayed something softer, something tired. "Nice of you to remember where we live," I said quietly, not trusting my voice with anything stronger. Ashley shrugged, tossing her backpack onto the couch. "I needed a break. You were suffocating me." The words cut, but I was too relieved to fight. Sophie squealed and ran to her sister, hugging her legs. Ashley bent down stiffly, patting her head as if unsure how to receive the affection. Ethan stayed seated at the table, watching warily, as if waiting for the storm to break again. "Dinner's almost ready," I offered, trying to keep my tone calm. Ashley rolled her eyes, but followed me into the kitchen. To my surprise, she pulled open the fridge and started taking things out. "You make the same boring food all the time. Let me try." I blinked, unsure whether to be offended or grateful. But when she began chopping vegetables with clumsy determination, I stepped aside. Sophie giggled as Ashley dropped half the carrots onto the floor. Ethan muttered something about not wanting food poisoning, but even he couldn't hide the small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in weeks, the apartment felt alive. We sat down together at the table, Ethan, Sophie, Ashley, and me. The food was unevenly cooked, too salty in places, underdone in others, but none of that mattered. Sophie declared it the best dinner ever, simply because her sister had made it. Ethan teased her about burning the chicken, and even Ashley cracked a reluctant smile. I watched them, my heart caught between relief and fear. I wanted to believe this was a turning point, that maybe Ashley was beginning to soften. But I knew how fragile it all was, like glass that could shatter at the slightest pressure. As the plates emptied and the laughter faded into yawns, Ashley leaned back in her chair, arms crossed but eyes heavy. "Don't get used to it," she muttered. "I'm not trying to be some perfect daughter. I just didn't feel like eating garbage tonight." Her words were sharp, but her tone lacked the venom it once carried. Beneath the bravado, I saw the truth. She was tired, maybe even scared. She had tested her freedom, only to find it lonelier than she imagined. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the kids tucked into bed, I stood in the doorway of Ashley's room. She lay with her back to me, scrolling through her phone. I wanted to say something. "Thank you for coming home. I missed you. Please don't leave again," but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "Good night," and left her to the quiet glow of her screen. In the dark hallway, I pressed a hand to my chest. For the first time in months, there was a flicker of hope. It was fragile, faint, but it was there, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, we hadn't lost each other completely. The morning of my interview at the restaurant started with a gray sky that seemed to press low over the city. By mid-afternoon, the snow had turned into a full storm, heavy flakes driven sideways by the wind. I should have canceled, should have stayed home, but I couldn't. We needed the money too badly, and this job promised better pay than the hotel. So I bundled myself in my old coat, kissed Ethan and Sophie goodbye, and hurried out into the cold. By the time I reached downtown, the streets were nearly deserted. Snow piled up along the sidewalks. Cars crawled with their hazard lights blinking, and the air cut against my cheeks like knives. I fought my way through the gusts, clutching my bag close to my chest. The thought of arriving late gnawed at me. I couldn't afford another failure. As I rounded a corner, I spotted an elderly man struggling against the storm. His coat was too thin, his hat pulled low over his ears, and each step looked like it might be his last. He held a small suitcase, dragging it behind him as the wind nearly knocked him sideways. Something in me tightened. I couldn't just pass him by. "Sir," I called out, raising my voice over the howl of the wind. "Do you need help?" He turned, his face lined and weary. "Train station," he shouted back. "I need to get to the station." The snow stung my eyes, but I nodded. The station was miles away. He'd never make it on foot. I hailed the only cab I could find, waving frantically until the driver pulled over. The old man hesitated at the door, fumbling with his wallet, his hands shaking from the cold. "I don't have enough," he muttered, embarrassment written across his face. Without thinking, I stepped forward. "I'll cover it." I pressed a few crumpled bills into the driver's hand and helped the man into the back seat. He looked at me, startled, then his expression softened into gratitude. "You didn't have to," he said quietly as the car pulled away, snow swirling around it. "I know," I replied. but I wanted to. He nodded, reaching into his pocket. At least take this. He scribbled an address onto a scrap of paper with trembling hands. Come by sometime. I'll repay you. I tucked the paper into my coat, too cold and too rushed to think about it. Just get warm, I told him and closed the door. The cab disappeared into the white blur, leaving me alone in the storm. My hair clung damp to my face, and I realized the interview was slipping through my fingers. The restaurant was across town and I was already late. Still, as I trudged toward the nearest bus stop, a strange warmth settled in my chest. By the time I finally got home, the storm still raging outside, my feet numb and my interview long missed. I should have felt defeated. But instead, I sat by the window with Sophie curled against me and Ethan reading quietly nearby, and I let myself breathe. For once, the house felt calm. I hadn't earned the job, hadn't solved our problems, but I had done one good thing that day. And in a life so often defined by exhaustion and failure, that small act of kindness gave me a fragile, fleeting peace. A few days passed, and I had nearly forgotten about the scrap of paper the old man had pressed into my hand. Life left little room for remembering anything beyond the next bill, the next shift, the next argument with Ashley. So when a knock sounded at our apartment door that Saturday afternoon, I wasn't prepared for who stood on the other side. It was him, the old man from the blizzard, his suitcase no longer in tow. He looked steadier this time, bundled in a heavier coat. But what stole my breath wasn't him. It was the man beside him, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes I knew too well, eyes I had once dreamed about, eyes I had tried for years to forget. My heart lurched. 17 years vanished in an instant, and I was 18 again, standing on the steps of the community college, laughing as he brushed snow from my hair. Linda! His voice was lower now, roughened by time, but it still wrapped around me like a forgotten melody. I gripped the edge of the doorframe, forcing myself to breathe. Daniel! Ashley appeared from the hallway, curiosity pulling her forward. She looked from me to him, confusion etched across her face. Mom? Who is this? My mouth went dry. The room tilted. For years, I had built walls around the secret, sworn never to let it slip. But now here he was, standing in my doorway, and Ashley's eyes, so much like his, searched mine for answers I no longer had the strength to hide. This is Daniel Hayes, I said finally, my voice breaking. I faltered, swallowing hard. Your father. The word hung in the air, heavy, impossible. Ashley's face, drained of color. What? No. Dad was Mark. She shook her head violently, as if trying to shake off the truth. What are you talking about? I stepped forward, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. Ashley, please. I never meant for you to find out like this. There are things you don't know, things I should have told you long ago. Daniel's father cleared his throat, his gaze soft but insistent. It's time, Linda. Let her hear it. I sank into a chair, my legs too weak to hold me. The words spilled out, bitter and heavy, each one scraping against the wounds I thought had scarred over. How Daniel and I had fallen in love when we were young, dreaming of a life together. How his mother despised me, called me unworthy, and did everything she could to tear us apart. How she threatened me, manipulated me, and finally forced me out of his life before he ever knew I was pregnant. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides as I spoke, his jaw tight with anger. She told me you left, he said, his voice hoarse. She said you didn't love me, that you ran off with someone else. Tears blurred my vision. I never stopped loving you, but I had no choice. I had to protect myself, and later I had to protect Ashley. Ashley stood frozen, her eyes wide, her breathing quick. So all this time, you lied to me? You let me think Mark was my dad when it was him. She jabbed a finger toward Daniel, her voice breaking between fury and disbelief. I wanted to keep you safe, I whispered. I thought the truth would only hurt more. Her face twisted, torn between rage and shock. She turned away, pacing the small room like a caged animal. The fragile peace we'd begun to rebuild seemed to shatter in an instant. I sat there, my heart aching with guilt, watching my daughter wrestle with a truth I had spent half my life burying. And all I could think was that the past had finally come to claim me, and there was no hiding anymore. The silence after my confession felt endless. Ashley stood with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her face pale, her eyes darting between Daniel and me, as if we had pulled the floor out from under her. I braced myself for her fury, for her to storm out again and vanish into the night. But Daniel stepped forward, his voice low, steady, carrying a weight that seemed to anchor the room. "Ashley," he said, his eyes fixed on hers. "I didn't know. I swear to you I had no idea. If I had known you existed, nothing could have kept me away. I can't change the years we lost, but if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Ashley's lips trembled. She tried to mask it with anger, but her voice cracked. "You expect me to just believe that? To believe you would have been there?" "Yes," Daniel answered simply, "because I see you now. And I see her." He gestured toward me, his eyes softening. "I know what we had, Linda and I, and I know what was stolen from us. Please give me a chance." Ashley's defenses wavered. For the first time in years, I saw the little girl inside her, the one who used to curl up in my lap with picture books, who used to slip her hand into mine without hesitation. Her eyes filled with tears she fought to hide. She turned away, swiping at her cheeks. "I don't know if I can forgive either of you," she whispered, "but I'm tired of being angry all the time." The words cracked something open in me. I wanted to rush forward to hold her, but I forced myself to wait. Slowly, Ashley came back to the table and sat down. She didn't look at me, not yet, but she didn't turn away either. That was enough for now. Over the days that followed, a fragile truce began to form. Daniel visited often, sometimes with his father, sometimes alone. He didn't press Ashley with questions or demands. He simply showed up, listening when she spoke, giving her space when she needed it. Little by little, her walls began to lower. At home, the sharp edges of our life softened. Ashley still bristled, still threw barbs now and then, but they no longer carried the same venom. Once, she even helped Ethan with his homework without me asking. Sophie, delighted to have her sister's attention again, followed her around like a shadow. One evening, as we cleared the table together, Ashley glanced at me and muttered, almost too quietly to hear, "Your cooking's not that bad." It wasn't an apology, but it was a step, and I clung to it like a lifeline. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the cracked ceiling, exhaustion pulling at me, but something else stirring underneath. For so long, I had felt like my life was nothing but loss. Mark's betrayal, his death, Ashley's anger, the endless grind of survival. But now, for the first time in years, I felt something else, the possibility of renewal. Daniel's presence couldn't erase the past. Ashley's wounds wouldn't heal overnight. My burdens hadn't magically disappeared. But I wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. I closed my eyes, whispering a silent prayer of gratitude. Whatever came next, I believed we could face it together. Because family wasn't just about what we had lost. It was about what we still had the courage to build.